With permission of the Chair and the Finance Minister, welcome everyone to this virtual event organized by the Institute for Policy Reforms. For over a year, we've held online discussions to highlight policy issues of critical importance to the country and our region. Today, we will discuss the soon-to-be announced budget in this meeting titled Budget 2022, Balancing Stability and Growth. My name is Ashraf Hayat. I'm Executive Director at the Institute. A deep thanks to all for joining, and especially our speaker, the Honorable Finance Minister, Mr. Shaukat Tareen. We will begin with a recitation from the Holy Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim, siratal lazina Anamta alayhim khairul maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. Once again, welcome. We look forward to an informed discussion on the parameters of the coming budget and on government's strategy to combat years of economic frailty, external dependence, and uneven growth. I know this will be a consequential discussion, also because we may gain insight into government's policy response to the multitude of challenges that are faced both by government and the people of Pakistan. We begin with introductory comments from Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan. Humayun Saab has been in public service for over 30 years. In 4 general elections, he was elected as Member National Assembly, during which period he was also Commerce Minister of Pakistan and Chairman BOI Minister of State for Investment. Among his many interests, Mr. Khan is also CEO and chairperson of this institute and a source of inspiration for all of us who work here. Establishing this institute is a manifestation of his deep commitment to making public policy and public institutions work for all Pakistanis. I request Humayun Saab for his welcome comments and for introducing today's topic. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab. I wish to thank the Finance Minister to find the time. We all know how busy he is at the moment in this very challenging assignment and the budget time. And of course, I would like to thank our valued participants who their participation is a source of encouragement for IPR. The Finance Minister will, I'm sure, go at length to describe the current state of the economy and what he intends to do in taking it forward. And therefore, rather than just talking about that, I just thought that I should briefly talk about what has been happening to Pakistan's economy over the last, let's say, 20 years. And that's a good period because it covers various governments. So the whole political spectrum is covered in that time. So one thing, our economy has always been close to default during this time, and the current account deficit always being in deficit. Look, current account deficit 1.5%, 2%, 1% is accepted, and that's not a issue for economists. But leaving a current account deficit at 6.5%, which was the case in 2018, is quite precarious for the economy. And this has happened despite, I will describe later, the kind of aid we have been getting during this time. And despite aid, we have been facing current account deficits, and that is quite unusual. Just give an example. In the last 20 years, there have been just 3 years where the current account has not been in deficit. The other trend that we constantly see, and I've always failed to understand, and when I have been in government, have been in perpetual arguments with finance ministers, and I know that the finance Shaukat Tareen shares my view on this, that the rupee for some reason is always kept overvalued, and that creates a general euphoria because the imports get cheap, and all the food items that are imported, oil, it gets cheap, and creates a feeling of goodwill. But that's always short-lived and temporary, because while the imports are getting cheap because of overvaluation of rupee, the exports are getting more expensive, and that is why we end up in the IMF the number of times that we have ended up with them. And the third trend that I see is the external debt continues to grow. Let me just give you a figure. Over the last 20 years, our debt has increased 3 times, 200%, the external debt. And therefore, the external debt, the debt servicing charge is the largest expenditure in our fiscal account right now, and continues to increase. In fact, our external debt servicing is almost twice the size of our public sector development program right now. So very clearly, and we don't spend this debt on projects that create foreign exchange. We basically spend this external debt to pay past debts, and let's say in the last 20 years, we have spent 2/3 of our external debt on budget and balance of payment, and 1/3 on development. And then there's no way we will be able to return this debt. And that is why we keep going back and take fresh external debt to pay back past debts. And the past debt, the debt stock of the country doesn't reduce, it keeps increasing despite that. So, I mean, whichever government is in power will continue to blame the past, but will have to borrow more than the past governments just to pay and service the past debt which has been accumulated, and which many times has not been their fault. Of course, their fault is that they have to restructure the economy, that this stops happening. Now, despite all this, the growth has been low. There are many reasons for that. Growth is not only low, it is declining. It is going down if you look at the trend. And of course, our Achilles heel of low savings and therefore low investments has been there. And savings, again, like growth, savings are not only low, they are also declining. They're not increasing, or they're not even staying steady. And workers' remittances help a bit, but primarily that goes towards consumption, and very little of it goes towards investment. The other big problem of low growth is very little private sector credit, and Shaukat Tareen is the best person to know about it. He's a banker of very high repute. There's obviously crowding out when the government has to go to the private sector, the banking sector, to fulfill their fiscal deficits. Obviously, the private sector is crowded out. There is another reason that few people realize that, you know, the DFIs, the development finance institutions of Pakistan, since the 80s, 90s, no longer exist. There were a number of them, they're all gone, which means there's no project financing. Project financing is fixed term, fixed interest rate financing, and which is a project developer needs that. So when the interest rates are low, everybody's very happy, they have to pay less. But when the rates are on their way up to very high levels sometimes, nobody can, in his or her right mind, would go into a new project. And in fact, there is a direct relationship between DFIs and growth. And one of the reasons that the growth is low is that there are no DFIs. And I would very much like that we focus towards creating some new DFIs or a national development bank. There exists since the 2000s an LTFF of the State Bank, which is a good scheme, but for exports. And the recent State Bank move of the turf financing, which has produced some excellent results. But we very definitely need a permanent kind of project financing setup. Third thing, low growth. The PSDP, various governments, I mean, they're whimsical about expenditure there. I mean, personal likes, dislikes, somebody likes motorways, somebody likes a lot of power generation. And it's also the first expenditure that is cut when the government is forced to meet some fiscal targets. So that seems to be our lowest priority, and the last but not the least, the labor productivity is low and has not improved. There's no product innovation. There is no value addition. We do not keep pace with technological advances. And one of the reasons that we have not talked much about, right now, our exports are not even sensitive to devaluations. And the reason is that the exports have not moved with technology and haven't added value. And over a period of time, if they remain static, other competitors come and move that product out of the international market. We also have not seen prolonged periods of growth. Not only is the growth low, you see, in order to get out of poverty, we must have prolonged period of growth. That's how all the East Asian economies have grown, not in spurts. For example, the longest period of growth we saw was the 60s. And after that, even in the 80s, we never got more than 2 years of high growth, or the 2000s, not more than 2. And contrary to the claims of some political parties that they led growth at 5.5 or 5.8%, that only happened in their last year. If you look at the start of their tenures, the growth was low. Other very dangerous element that is happening is agriculture as a percentage of GDP is going down. Now, not always dangerous, provided it is accompanied by the manufacturing sector growing. But unfortunately, the manufacturing sector is also going down as a percentage of GDP, and we are relying on consumption, and the service sector is going up. The economy generally, we have seen only grows when it grows in periods of aid flows. And when the aid flows stop coming, we end up with another kind of aid, which is the multilateral financial institutions, the IMF and all that. And the reason is that during the aid flows and during the periods of moderately higher growth, relatively higher growth, that comes primarily from government expenditure and from consumption, and not from manufacturing and exports. We are never able to enhance productive capacity. We are never able to have capital formation or development of good infrastructure, or never been able to develop international class human resources. All I'll say now, and I personally feel that it is now a matter of national survival. We all talk about it, but if you want to break out of poverty, we need sustained periods of high growth, 6, 7, 8%. We need high quality HR, and we need to, the jobs are going to come from the private sector. The government share in creating new jobs is constantly decreasing. It's less than 20% now. The jobs are going to come from the private sector, and all we have to do, and I leave it to Shaukat to talk about what he has in mind, and I know he has a lot of excellent ideas. I've been working with him for a long time. We have to follow the East Asian model, the Japanese model, the Korean model, the Chinese model. They all first consolidated their manufacturing and their industries with incentives, with support, with policies. But that support was not perpetual. It had sunset clauses. It was linked to moving towards the next phase, the next value addition, and then eventually penetrating the international markets in a competitive manner. That's the kind of direction we need to move. We only should support efficient industries, and we should reduce the cost of doing business. We've heard a lot about that, but if your cost is higher than your competitors, particularly the cost of utilities, you will never be able to compete. And the government must get involved in high quality technical training and move with technological advances in the world, and produce the required infrastructure in Pakistan. Now, I've spoken too much, but I just thought I should tell the audience that what is the problem with our economy. And I know that there's nobody better equipped today than our new finance minister, Mr. Shaukat Tareen, to handle this. And with these remarks, I'd like to thank everybody once again, and ask the executive director to invite the finance minister.
Thank you, sir. That was a fine synopsis of the state of play of the economy and some ground truths about the challenges and the possibilities that lie before us, which is a good segue to our main topic of discussion today. Gives me special pleasure to welcome Minister for Finance and Revenue, Mr. Shaukat Tareen. In the brief period that he has been finance minister, Mr. Tareen has shared a clear vision of how he sees the possible evolution of Pakistan's economic landscape. He has called for sustained and inclusive growth of the economy, sending positive signals all around. The task, though, is fraught with challenges. But Mr. Tareen is no stranger to taking on difficult assignments. In 2008, he became finance minister, and he and his team soon brought stability to an economy that was hit hard by the global financial and economic crisis. His other major achievement then, and there were more, was conclusion of a consensus National Finance Commission Award. That this was done after 19 years of back and forth between the Federation and provinces shows the pitfalls inherent in this process and the care and knowledge that it needed to bring it to fruition. Earlier, Mr. Tareen led a turnaround of Pakistan's largest nationalized bank, Habib Bank Limited. Behind these achievements is a long and successful banking career within Pakistan and internationally. His achievements have earned wide recognition. Mr. Tareen is a recipient of the National Civil Award Sitare-e-Pakistan for contribution to public service, and the State Bank of Pakistan's Qaid-e-Azam Gold Medal. It is an extraordinary track record, but one that also raises expectation. It is my privilege to invite the Finance Minister to the virtual podium. Your mic, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the introduction. I'll just go straight into where we are today. I think, well, everybody knows that by the end of last government's tenure, although we had a growth of between 5.5% to 5.8%, but we also had a current account deficit of almost $20 billion. We had an overvalued rupee. Actually, our exports had declined from $25 billion in 2013 to almost $21 billion in 2018. We had a high fiscal deficit, and the country was moving towards a default, as state bank reserves were barely enough to, meet 1 to 1.5 months of imports. And we had a ballooning circular debt. Those days, the payments for the capacity payments were around 465 billion rupees a year. I think Prime Minister gave him credit. He tried his level best to get money from his friends and found out the hole was too big. So he had to go to the IMF. Unlike 2008, when I went to the IMF, when people were friendly to us, the countries were friendly to us because of war on terror, and we got a very useful package, which was almost 6 times our quota. This time around, IMF was very tough. I think they were not, obviously, given the geopolitical situation around us, the countries who influenced, the major Western powers. So this IMF program was tough and front-loaded. The interest rates, the discount rate was raised to 13.25% when the core inflation was 7%. Frankly, I have a problem because discount rates don't manage food inflation. Core inflation was 7% and overall inflation of a little over 10%, where the rest was food inflation. I think IMF mandating us to go to 13.25% was an overkill, which cost us hundreds of billions of rupees. They also made us do a steep devaluation of our rupee. There were sharp increases in electricity, gas, and other tariffs to bring down the circular debt flows. Well, this was for stabilization of the economy. Obviously, the growth rate, went down, and we're looking at around 1.5, 1.9% growth. But then COVID happened, and COVID pushed this growth to negative territory, 0.5%. The government just did well, introduced a fiscal stimulus, gave people, the needy people, some money, cash, and it was very efficiently done by the Ehsaas program. There was a liquidity stimulus by the State Bank of Pakistan for the business sector, whether large, small, and then Prime Minister, I think, did a great job by introducing the construction package, because he realized that construction is one industry which not only just brings in a lot of labor to work, but also supports around 42 industries on its own. And by giving them the incentives, you would at least pump up some kind of, economic activity. Economy started to stabilize, current account deficits, actually was curtailed. And in the recent year, it is in a surplus. But economic growth was negative. It started recovering this year as the large-scale manufacturing started to pick up. Exports started to pick up. Agriculture, major crops were, very robust, except cotton. And services sector, started to pick up alongside housing. Not only this happened, but as the economy picked up, we have seen the revenues of the government also started to pick up. This month, they will cross 4 trillion rupees for the first time in the history of Pakistan, and probably will be closer to 4.2. We see a 3.94% growth in the economy. Well, people predicted start of this fiscal that probably be between 1.5 to 3%, but I think we are hitting around 3.94%. But this is where we are today. So you want to hear what are we going to do going forward? I think what we want is an inclusive and sustainable growth over a long period of time. As Humayun said, the East Asian economies such as Turkey, they achieved a certain level of economic, prosperity through inclusive and sustainable growth. So, as he said that, we have never had sustainable growth for a long period of time, except in the 60s. So when I just came in, I just got some eminent economists together. We had an EAC, Economic Advisory Council, but out of that Advisory Economic Council, we had a few eminent economists led by Dr. Ishrat Hussain, and I requested them to find out why don't we have an inclusive and sustainable growth over a long period of time? What causes us to break the cycle? So they are working on it. By the next week, we'll probably have, a very comprehensive answer. But then we also tasked the Economic Advisory Council to work with the government in 12 sectors of the economy, and give us short-term, medium, and long-term plans how to grow these sectors. We do not have the resources to, cover all the sectors, but we are focused now. And I'm talking about major sectors like fiscal side. We're talking about the agriculture, manufacturing, power sector, financial sector, housing, all those major sectors. We said, now you please give us some way forward. And this is the first time that we'll be doing this, because after the 60s, when we used to have a very powerful planning commission, and it's usually the mother of the government, I think successive governments, made them just a project evaluation and implementation division. This time around, we are going to do this, and hopefully, when it starts working, we're going to fold that, whole process into the planning commission to make it once again a very powerful, ministry. But then we will have a planned growth and a roadmap which we can, not only this government can follow, but subsequent governments can also follow. And this has been, the hallmark of countries who have grown, that they had consistency in the planning process, and whether it's India, China, and some of the other East Asian countries, and even in Turkey. So what is our focus now? I think our focus has now shifted to growth. Unless we do not grow the economy, I think with all these other things, we are not going to be able to move into the next orbit. So how do we grow the economy? The first task is obviously, like any other government, is to increase revenues. Our revenues at less than 10% of GDP, they're not good enough. So we have to figure out how to grow these revenues, and I'll obviously will tell you some of those things which we will be doing. But the fact is that we are going to add ₹1 trillion into our, revenue stream, next year. This year will be the highest, revenue collection, closer to, 4.8 trillion rupees, which is the first in history. But then next year we'll probably go to around 5.8 trillion. IMF is saying, closer to, 6 trillion. But whether it's 5.8 or 6, it's pretty close. But never have we collected ₹1 trillion additionally in a year. So that receives our number one, a kind of focus or efforts. Then PSDP, we are going to spend 650 billion this year, but then it will ramp it up to around 900 billion next year. But it will have to be efficient. And I think for the knowledge of the audience, the Planning Commission started, doing the public-private partnerships, in the PSDP, which means the amount of 900 billion will have a greater impact on the ground with the participation of the private sector. Then we move into the productive sectors. Productive sectors of our economy, which are number one to me, is agriculture. We all know that we used to be a food exporting country. Now we are a net food importing country. And this is a far cry from the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, 90s. So we got to focus on that. We have to focus on all the elements of our agriculture chain. And I think there is the plan which is really a very, very progressive plan which is being put in place. And in this budget too, you will see that we'll put in we give a lot of incentives to the agriculture sector of our economy. We have to make our industry more efficient. When we make our industry more efficient, our exports become more efficient and we export more. So am I asked, why is it that we keep falling this trap? The very fact is that when we start growing, obviously there is a pressure on, imports. People have the buying power, so they just try to buy things which are then we can't manufacture, we don't manufacture, so we import. And that puts pressure on our, reserves, foreign currency reserves. Because our exports are not keeping pace with our overall growth, we fall short of dollars. Never have we gone into a tailspin for other reason than balance of payments. So exports, exports, exports. I think that is the mantra. And I will later on tell you what kind of measures we are taking, to just boost our exports. We are also going to just give incentives to our service industry, whether it's housing. We are also during this within the services sector, we have also make our e-commerce very efficient through digitization, and we will give incentives over there, so that we, rather than just being a cash economy, it becomes a digital economy, and that just creates opportunities for us even in the revenue collection. We have to stabilize the power sector. Power sector is a big hole. Today at 2.3 trillion, the circular debt is humongous. Not only we have to stop the flows, we got to reduce it over a period of time. And how do we do it? When there is a challenge of capacity payments, which are going to go up, rise up to 1.45 trillion rupees a year. Remember, I told you it was 465 billion in 2018. We're going to triple to 1.5 trillion, 4.5 trillion. Because I think when we started installing additional capacity, we forgot that it has to be used. Or otherwise, because of the contracts, we'll have to start paying for the electricity we are not even, producing and using. So this is a great challenge, because unless we make it financially viable, nobody's going to invest in this sector in the future. So this is a great challenge, and we are coming up with innovative ways to make sure that our circular debt does not increase and starts reducing, over a period of time. But the Prime Minister has given commitment to the people of Pakistan that, we are not going to increase the electricity tariff in the near future, because that doesn't help. People are already burdened with, a very costly electricity. Maybe the lower end is protected, but what about the middle class? What about the industrial sector, commercial sector, export sector? So power sector has to be stabilized. We need to control prices. And prices here, what we see is it's all food inflation. I've already mentioned to you about agriculture. Unless we do not increase the production of agriculture, this is not going to be, controlled in a kind of a long term. So we also have to give the market the mechanism to take away these large margins which people have, the middlemen have, from the farmer to the wholesaler. The margins are over 400-500%. So we need to create commodity warehousing, cold storages, mechanism for farmer to come to the wholesale market themselves, alongside, productivity in the agriculture sector, so that we start producing surpluses. Administrative control also will have to be strengthened. And during the Musharraf era, I think price control magistrates were removed. We have to think through, whether we have to bring them back. But importantly, I think, this is going to be a change from the previous governments. That we are not only going to be dependent on the trickle-down effect to boost the incomes of the people. Because what has happened in the past is that with 3, 4, 5 year, growth cycles, the minute, the trickle down reaches in the bottom segments of our society, the cycle breaks. These guys, they take one step forward and then fall right back to where they were. So that is why we are saying a sustainable growth over a long period of time, so that that trickle-down effect reaches all sectors of the economy. But as I said, departure from the past, we are also going to be working on the bottoms-up approach. Even Joe Biden has said the US needs that. If US needs that, by God, we certainly need that. When I say bottoms-up approach, I'm saying the 4 to 6 million households at the bottom rung of our income levels will have to be given interventions whereby they can earn their living on their own and not just be dependent on handouts. They should have houses. They should have health insurance. They should have skill development for, their family members so that they can go and just, get some jobs. A comprehensive package. And we have to do it in a way whereby it's not inflationary. That it basically does not, we don't depend on fiscal deficits to fund this. So it has to be innovative, and we are working on that. So what do we have in the budget? I think in the budget, we have additionality of 1 trillion rupees in revenues. We are not going to go increase taxes on people who are paying taxes, apart from remove some incentives from people we believe they've been given incentives for no rhyme or reason. We are going to take away the harassment, of the FBR from the lives of the people. A lot of people complain that we are not in the net because we are worried about the harassment of FBR. So in this budget, you will see the announcement that there will be universal self-assessment and third-party audit for 3 to 4% of the population, a risk-based population, but done by third party. No FBR person will do that. So people will be free of the harassment of the FBR. But if that is done, then it will be incumbent upon people who have incomes or the merchants who have, who basically control consumption to pay taxes. Because if we find out, and we'll have a cell which go all out using technology, which now gives us the ability to reach out to those people who have electricity bills, they have energy bills, they have deposits. So we have the data. We'll reach them, and if they are willful defaulters, those people who are supposed to pay taxes are not paying taxes. So we'll basically take punitive actions and put them behind bars. We mean business. We believe that using technology will help us expand our retail, GST. We have around 80,000 POSs in the market. We are only using 10,000 who are linked to the FBR. But I just want to go beyond that. I want to go beyond the 80,000. I want to take these POSs to 500,000 POSs in 2 years. Now somebody will ask, who the hell is going to pay for them? The traders are not going to pay. We will pay. FBR will pay. We are going to pay for the POSs, and then we'll come up with a scheme whereby we give prizes to people who actually pay the sales tax. They send us the invoices or receipts, and we'll give them prizes every month. Large prizes, very large pool of prizes. So the consumer is going to make sure they force the retailer to give the proper receipt, or they'll move away from that store. So it's not going to be coercion. We are going to incentivize the customer to do that. And this has happened not only what we are doing, this is not unique. This happened in Turkey, happened in Colombia. I saw, in Kenya, there have been numbers in almost all retail shops. So it's happening all over the world. So this will help us really increase our sales, where we have 17% sales, GST. The contribution is, less than 5%. We're also going to, incentivize the productive sectors, the industry, the exports, as I said, told you, agriculture. This time around, I just told the Ministry of Commerce, you tell us what's the envelope you need, and let us not tell you how to distribute that. You distribute to those industries, those exporters who will enhance the productivity in their sectors. So they are going to be the decision makers. It's a paradigm shift. And let me tell you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, nobody wants to let go of it, the control. And FBR is no exception. But I have convinced them, and they are convinced now, that let the productive side of our economy tell us what they need, and then we'll track it. It's not that, we just basically is free money. But we'll track it, but they have to decide. And this is, as I said, is a paradigm shift in thinking. We're going to incentivize exports through SCZs. As a matter of fact, we just decided that 1.5% in turnover tax is not going to be applicable in special economic zones. We are going to incentivize exports in the value-added sector. And we are going to incentivize IT. IT is $2 billion exports this year. I want to see that $8 billion in 2023. And by the way, in India, they broke the $1 billion exports in 2000. By 2010, they had crossed $100 billion. We had the same, a kind of caliber of people, if not better. So I think IT is where we must invest. And then we need to bring in FDI. This is very important. We need to bring in FDI in the export sector. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, and I'm not blaming the private sector in this, somehow the other, we have been saying export or import substitution is the same thing. I don't think so. When you basically say import substitution, yes, you replace, the dollars you would have spent on imports. Exports gives you much more than that. Export gives you, the ability to, if you have FDI over there, the technology, the money which comes in, the foreign currency for investments, but export markets. And that's how these East Asian countries, including China, have progressed. You all realize what Deng Xiaoping did in 1979. He actually created 4 zones and told them that these are your zones. You will have your own, legal system, financial system, labor system, and ability to train people. And we'll give you the territory, and then you just bring in money, manufacture, and re-export. Malaysia did the same thing. India has done, more or less the same thing. Turkey has done it, and so we should do the same thing. We must now encourage FDI in exports. We also need to, because exports have been a family business. So what has happened is the father is the chairman, the eldest son is the managing director, and then finance director and a sales director. So when father dies, within 2 generations, the family splits, and so does the business. All our industries today are fragmented, whether it's textile, whether it is leather, sports goods, I think, just there are exceptions, large groups over there. Otherwise, it's fragmented. So they cannot compete with the rest of the world. So they become a commodity business, and they basically compete on price. So we've got to consolidate this. Unfortunately, we did not have a Chapter 11. Now we have that in shape of CRA, Corporate Restructuring Act. So we use that, we create the enabling environment and consolidate our industry. So there is scale. So there is value addition. And we bring in foreign investor to buy those entities and invest. We got to develop the most important, asset we have, human resource. I think Humayun mentioned that. I mean, our, education level at 60% is not good enough. Our health, we don't spend any money over there. I think Prime Minister Imran Khan wants to quadruple, the investments in these two categories. Obviously, these are the provincial subjects, but we'll work with the provinces to make sure that we basically spend quality money on education and health. There is another area which people forget, but is a great enabler. I think Humayun has already mentioned that, and that's the financial sector. I think banking footprint, is only 33-34% of the GDP. Compare that to 50-55% Bangladesh, 80-90% in India, 180% in Korea, and 225% in China. So if our entire formal economy, which has no access to capital markets, depends on the banking sector, and banking sector only supports them, 16 to 17%, because the advances to deposit ratio is only 50%. Then how the hell are we going to grow? So we have to work on that. We have to increase the banking footprint in this country. We have to, remove the regional disparity in the resource allocations. Money is collected all over the country, spent in only 85% of that is spent in 9 cities. KPK has over 600 billions of deposits. The money lent in KPK is less than 50 billion. Similarly, Balochistan, North Sindh, South Punjab, Azad Kashmir. So this disparity has to be removed. The sectoral, 75% is corporate, lending. The rest is 5-6% here and there, whether it's SME, consumer, agriculture. So I think this has to be removed. Then create capacity, as Humayun said, to fund projects and infrastructure. When PICIC, IDPP, etc. were rolled, into different banks and said that, well, we have large banks and they're going to lend projects and for projects and infrastructure, that hasn't happened. Because they've gone to the private sector, and private sector, finds very, very easy to make money by putting money into the government paper. So we got to now set up, some, DFIs and infrastructure development, banks. We have to bring in FDI. Board of Investment has to do a better job. We have to now leverage CPAC. China is outsourcing 85 million jobs in the sunset industry, but for us, that's not sunset, textile, leather, and including, we should ask them to bring in, investment in IT. We would like to bring in technology in all facets of our economic life. So make the economy more efficient. I think I'll just stop right here. So at the end, what am I saying? There will be emphasis on growth. And we would like to have it all inclusive and sustainable growth. I don't want to see this economy, just going through the 10% in 2 years. It will not. And it should not. We should grow the economy in a manner whereby it sustains itself over a long period of time and it's inclusive. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm here to take your calls, questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Finance Minister. That was a very insightful and a very complete discussion. And as I said in my introduction, your comments in the press so far have sent very positive signals. And in my view, you've only reinforced those positive signals today. Thank you. I'll just raise a couple of things before we go to questions. You did talk about the ESC and having 12 sectors with specialist economists if you look at East Asia, all of the growth has been led by the chief executive of the country, and it makes a reading of a who's who of the leading political leaders of the last 50 years: Lee Kuan Yew, Deng Xiaoping, Mahathir Mohamad, and this has to be integrated because there's strong political economy issues in Pakistan as well. You very rightly pointed to the IPPs, the power sector, but that's just the highlight. There are other things, and I don't want to, of course, contest what you're saying. Just moving this discussion a little bit further, I also feel that the PSDP, and that's why the Planning Commission's chairman, when it was envisaged in the beginning, is the Prime Minister of Pakistan. I also feel that the PSDP should have just, and that's a personal opinion, anyone can disagree with that, just have one goal, which is export growth by building the right infrastructure and by investing in human capital. And you've alluded to that. The IT industry will only grow if we have the human capital and import substitution. I know that you disagree with it, but the East Asian model was to import, to start making parts and then take over that product and start exporting. Thank you very much. So that was extremely enlightening.
I wish to thank everybody for a very, which I thought, a productive session. And I hope the finance minister and the participants found it productive too. I will not repeat what has been said by some very illustrious participants. Just that we all know that immediately, if we want growth in our FPR revenue, if we want overall growth in the economy, and if we want to produce jobs, the focus has to be manufacturing. And not only manufacturing, but as Shaukat said, exports related manufacturing. And in exports, as has been mentioned by a number of people who are very experienced in exports, Wajid and Tariq Ikram, amongst others, buyer-driven FDI. I mean, FDI in a sector where an international buyer comes and invests in a country. And I'd like us to focus, Shaukat, just on China right now and focus on the sectors that are moving out of China, that are moving to Indonesia, that are moving to Vietnam, and textiles is one of them, and appliances is another, and two-wheelers and three-wheelers you have mentioned. Let's get the Chinese to come to Pakistan. Now, you may not like it. There is only one Chinese exporter actually in Pakistan right now. And I know for a fact the others are not coming. Let's focus the CPEC on bringing the Chinese textile sector and the appliances sector and other sectors, because China labor cost is now expensive. It's moving to very rapidly to high technology items. Let's make that a priority. Focus on the service sector. I mean, Shaukat, you remember that in the late 90s, we opened the service sector for foreign direct investment. And look what that has done to the transport, to the motorway services, to the retail, to the wholesale, the social sector, hospitals, education. See what that has done. The introduction of FDI and services, encourage more of that. Now, agriculture, I like your focus on agriculture. Pardon my saying, but Mother Nature runs the agriculture sector in Pakistan. Good sunshine, good rains, no virus, it does well. We have not done much. It's a tragedy that we have moved so far down in cotton and India has moved so far up. And we all know it happened because of seed, and we did not take timely actions of the right kind of seed. Let us focus. I mean, we are losing our comparative advantage in textile because we are just becoming like Bangladesh. We have to import most of our cotton. So there goes our comparative advantage. And your focus on the IT sector, just a few suggestions. I think the government and the State Bank of Pakistan has done a wonderful job in promoting digitalization in the country. Allow me to make a few suggestions. Let the EMIs and digital banks get involved in cross-border movement of money. I mean, the scrutiny is very tough by State Bank. We all know what needs to be done. Them involved, a lot of overseas Pakistanis still are using informal channels. Imagine what it can do. The freelancers in Pakistan are having one hell of a problem getting their money. Amazon is now coming into Pakistan. Have we thought the traders of Pakistan and Amazon and the PSPs that they use, Payoneer or PayPal, we have to make that bit easy for Pakistan to get involved with the likes of Amazon internationally. Let's focus on some more payment gateways. We just have the micro payment gateway that Karandaz and State Bank has created. Let's create some more payment gateways. And let me tell you, you see, China moved from a cash society to almost 100% cashless society right now. And they did not use the POSes, although POSes are important, but POSes are expensive. And recently, State Bank has changed the rules and made it more attractive for a POS investor to come and invest. But then you have to change the mindset. The merchant has to feel easy using a POS, getting a POS device to be used, and should not be afraid of FPR. And a customer has to feel comfortable using a debit card on a POS device rather than only on the ATM machine. So this mindset has to be changed and introduce services like, the biggest payments in China are done by the WeChat financing and the Alipay financing. And they are direct from a messenger service, they have become a financial service. And of course, Irfan Wahab Saab was here, but let me say, the telecoms have done a great job, except I would urge the telecoms to move away from only fund transfers and into other mechanisms of supporting the merchants and the supply chain. With that, I'd like to thank everybody, the valued participants, and in particular, Shaukat, it has been very kind of you. We know how busy you are, and we just hope that you find the session productive. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Finance Minister. You've been a huge draw for us. Thank you again, sir. And everyone else. Bye. I'll end the meeting now.